In this episode of Cosmic Sponge, another USS warship encounters UFOs off the East Coast. Scientists clone cats for money, and then we take a long look back on our first year to discuss our favorite cases, funniest news stories, mistakes made, and where our respective needles have moved on the belief scales for everything from Bigfoot to UFOs. Oh, and we also spend a little time flexing our skeptical muscles.
Did you have your glasses? Where are you, my optic? Do you wear glasses? I mean, just...
Clearly what he saw was a black cat duct taped to a kite smoking a cigarette.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we discuss UFOs and other weird wonders in the world. I'm Stephen Hawk.
And I'm Jimmy Coe.
Tonight we are taking a special look back at the past year. This is episode 50. And I know we've had a few listeners out there that have been with us since the very beginning. But we've also picked up a lot of new listeners, and that's awesome. I mean, that's why we're doing this thing. Our very first episode, Jimmy and I went back and forth on, what do you believe with UFOs? What's your thoughts about Bigfoot? Kind of went back and forth on where we stood back in those days. And I listened to that episode. I haven't listened to it, obviously, for a year. And Jimmy kept trying to say, hey, what's your percentage here? Is it 10%, 20%? And of course, I never answered. Jimmy, being the software engineer, the mathematician there, always wants to have cut and dry numbers. But
I want you to commit, man. I want you to commit.
So we thought it would be kind of fun to look back at the past year and these episodes and see if our attitudes have changed. But before we get into that, Jimmy, what you been up to this past week?
Well, like you, I went back and I listened to some of the early episodes, and the one that I like the most is the Nimitz, because that's really why I called you when we were starting to think about different things to do for a podcast, and we kept coming back to UFOs, really.
Yeah.
And it was the Nimitz case, right, that got us going.
But before you get into that, we
Sure.
want to do some news?
Yeah. This is news.
Oh,
so
okay.
When I look
back...
So
this is a segue.
This is a segue.
I'm sorry, man. I blew your whole segue there. See, I thought you were already taking off on the retrospective part about it.
Oh, no, that's okay. You're going to edit it out. You're going to make it smooth.
No, I won't. I'm leaving it all.
Fair enough. So another U.S. warship this last week, I think, encountered UFOs again. Trailing behind it, these two large orbs were trailing behind this.
I don't know if I've seen this story.
Yeah. So it is, the headline, it's from The Sun. So the headline is, U.S. warship was chased by two car-sized balls of light. A U.S. Navy warship was shadowed by two car-sized balls of light that were unaffected by anti-drone weapons. The USS Kearsarge, I think that's how you say it, and I'm going to spell it just for old time's sake. It's the USS, that's USS, and the Kearsarge, which is Kearsarge. It's a Wasp-class amphibious cruiser, I think is what it's called. And there have been 5 ships named the Kearsarge, but only 4 commissioned because they changed the name of one of those 5 to the Hornet. That's neither here nor there. I went down the rabbit hole on the names and all that kind of stuff. This particular ship was trailed by 2 car-sized balls of light. They lurked near the 40,500-ton amphibious assault ship for several nights while it was on a training exercise off the East Coast. The objects are said to have been spotted at night by the deck watch, who could not gain a thermal targeting lock on them. It is understood the incident was recorded on video by the crew, but none of the footage has yet been released. Marines on board said that they thought it was part of the training exercise. However, they discovered the countermeasures did not disrupt the objects, which were doing swooping maneuvers as they followed the ship. When they radioed command about the objects, they were informed the objects were not ours. The guy who did the original Nimitz documentary, David Beatty, is the one who's trying to get more information on this and diving into it a little deeper for the rest of us. And hopefully he'll be able to get some more information on it.
Right. I saw that he was contacted by a now retired U.S. Marine officer identified only as Mark regarding the strange episode. I wonder, is he going for like a one-name thing like Cher or Prince, maybe? Mark.
Every time I hear Mark, I remember that one of those comic-y movies, one of those little animated films where they had the little man, I can't remember what it was, a little fish or something. Maybe it was Finding Nemo or something, and all the little fishies are going, Mark, 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 Mark. I don't know if you remember that.
Well, I don't know, man. I think maybe you've been dipping into the fungi like you're always accusing the UFOs.
Hey, it's research.
Yeah. Research. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm sorry, officer. What's going on here? Research. Researching how many bottles of wine I have to drink before I see Bigfoot.
Son, he's in your back seat. That's that smell.
Yeah, I know. I picked him up. I've got a story here. Now, this has nothing to do with paranormal UFOs or anything else, but I found it to be just a strange science story. I posted this on Facebook. The story comes from the Washington Post. I was really very surprised by this. Now, we've known cloning has been around forever. When did they first clone Dolly the sheep? That was...
Is that in the 90s?
1997.
Yeah. That's the year I graduated.
Yeah, from comedian school.
That's right. Clown college.
I mean, obviously the technology's been here for cloning, but, you always think of serious scientists are working on this. Well, I read an article that this lady had a cat named Chia. Guess she always wanted a Chia pet, but this was a live cat. Poor Chia had a freak accident by swallowing a piece of a wrapper, and it got lodged in her intestines, and she died.
Oh, that's such a sad story.
It is sad. It was a 5-year-old cat, and she died in 2017. But anyway, she had heard about a Texas-based ViaGen Pets, and it's one of the few companies worldwide that clones pets.
No way.
The next morning she called them. She paid $25,000. And 5 years later, she has a 6-month-old carbon copy clone of Chia curled up in her lap.
And there's some animal shelter that is missing one cat that looks just like Chia.
And some guy with $25,000 in his pocket. No, this is the real McCoy, man.
Well, how does she know? Does she sequence the DNA herself to make sure that it's legit?
Let me see. It says in here what they do. Toshe Myong J. Ko, a professor at University of Illinois, said that the process of cloning is relatively simple. It starts with a couple of cells from the pet's tissue, usually from the ear or belly. In a lab, the cells are then placed into a concoction of enzymes to pluck out the DNA. Next, the scientists retrieve an unfertilized egg from another donor animal. Then the egg's nucleus is removed and swapped with the nucleus of the pet's cells. The new egg, which carries the pet's DNA, is placed in a mixture with nutrients usually found in the uterus, culturing them until they can become embryos to be implanted into a surrogate. If everything turns out right, the surrogate will carry the pregnancy to term, and boom, a clone is born. It's pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, so if I die, are you going to clone me?
No, man, you're one of a kind.
I don't know. You could try it and see what happens.
It'd just be too weird. Like raising a small Jimmy Co. Trying to explain to him that you were like a friend of mine and co-host of a podcast at one time. I mean, I would be old as hell, right, by the time he could even like do anything.
Well, then you just teach the young Jimmy Co to clone you when you die.
And just keep the thing going. We could keep the podcast going.
See?
Cosmic Sponge forever.
Forever.
All right, man. But anyway, I just found that crazy. Like I said, it's not paranormal, but I swear, man, when I was a kid, that sounds like something I would have read in a science fiction novel, right? I mean, someone, instead of going to the shelter and rescuing a cat, poor Chia died, let me go get another cat. She's like, no, I'm going to spend $25,000 and I'm going to clone my cat. That's only going to last maximum like 20 years, maybe, right?
Right.
I don't know.
So just hear me out here. Welcome to Cosmic Sponge. I'm Stephen Hawk, version 23. And I'm Jimmy Co, version 772. I die a lot because I don't pay attention when I cross the street.
Oh, man, that is nutty. So anyway, let's move on to tonight's main topic. But before we do, I'd like to ask everyone to take a moment, even if you're driving in your car, pull over, grab your mobile phone, go to CosmicSponge.com and check out all the stuff we have on our webpage. We have the web store where you can buy coffee mugs, t-shirts, notebooks, water bottles, all kinds of stuff that has our Cosmic Sponge logo on it. And there's our contact information, which is first contact at CosmicSponge.com. So just reach out to the show and say hello if you'd like, or tell us your story. If you have an experience out there, you can remain totally anonymous. But if you have an experience you'd like to share it with the other listeners of the show, email the show and let us know. Also, you can support the show if you look up in the upper right-hand corner. There's a little coffee cup. That's called Buy Me a Coffee. Then also there's a little link next to it. Click on it and it takes you to Patreon. We have another show called Weird Wonders that is exclusively for our Patreon supporters, along with a few other benefits. If you want to read about a cloned cat or two balls that float behind a Navy warship, then check out our Facebook page or subscribe to Cosmic Sponge Theorist on Facebook. Check out Instagram. Jimmy does all kinds of funny stuff on there. Check it out. It's worth a look.
I will.
So moving on to tonight's main topic. This is all about the retrospective, right? So we put out our very first episode.
This is funny. We have them backwards, right? Because actually the first episode is on May 10th, and the second episode came out on May 5th.
Right. Being podcasters, this is actually our second show. Jimmy and I did another podcast. In fact, it's still kind of ongoing, kind of maybe. I don't know. We do it with some other guys too. But we'd already been down this road once a couple of years before. We wanted to release 3 episodes before we released any. They say that's the thing to do, right? You know, put a few shows out there. When we did that, for some reason, the Nimitz Encounter came up as episode 1 and showed released on May 5th, 2021. And actually our first episode, UFOs, Bigfoot, and Other Weird Things, shows coming out on May 10th as our second episode. But in reality, that's our first episode. And that was way back almost a year ago. I guess, Jimmy, let me just start this thing off. Let's look at UFOs. In a way, that's what we started this whole podcast about. You and I both got very interested in the Roosevelt, the Nimitz Encounters, ATIP. You and I were texting back and forth saying, hey, did you see this, see that? We were talking about it a lot and sharing articles, and we thought we should do a podcast. Neither one of us had really delved deeply into it beyond watching the occasional documentary and just reading a few things here and there. But in the past year, after you've done some of these stories, what's changed with you with UFOs? Where's your belief level now?
That's a hard question for me to answer. I'm always fairly skeptical, but not skeptical in like the traditional sense of skeptics in the UFO community, because there's the skeptics who would just poo-poo on everything. I'm skeptical much more in like a philosophical way, maybe like a Cartesian skepticism, something that has more of a method to it. I leave the possibility open, and there are a few cases, just a handful of them, that make me think there's more to what's going on in the world than what we know. For the most part, I think there's prosaic answers for 90% of the UFO cases out there.
I think for me, a couple of things have changed my perception of what UFOs could be. One of them was reading the book by Jacques Vallée,
Passport to
Magonia.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it a different way than it's just space aliens. I still don't know what UFOs are, and I still think there are legitimate UFOs and flying saucers that are something strange. Some of the stories that are taken for granted as being true, such as Roswell, we just finished that up, the 2-part episode of Roswell, and you get down, start looking into the evidence, and it's obvious it was just Project Mogul. There's so many holes with that story, and all the stuff that came after it to me is just, it's just someone trying to make money, publish more books, and there's been so much false information put out about it anyway. So I'm skeptical in that way. But at the same time, I think I've learned that there's definitely some cases that I think are legitimate that we've covered.
Yeah, which ones?
The first one that comes to mind is the Lonnie Zamora case.
Yeah,
and
it's a balloon.
I'm going to tell you why.
Yeah.
I guess what I like the most, or what I've enjoyed the most, being able to research the old records that are declassified now from the government. And the government took UFOs very seriously. Listeners, if you want to go back to episodes 3 and 4, the history of UFOs, part 1 and 2, and then episode number 5 is where we talk about the Lonnie Zamora case. What was neat was seeing the declassified reports and I'm not even sure they were classified, but the reports that came from Project Blue Book and J. Allen Hynek, who began as an open skeptic way back with Project Sign, the predecessor to Blue Book. And by the time he gets to the 60s, he's becoming a believer. And by the time Project Blue Book was closed in 1969, he's a big proponent of flying saucers and UFOs. And he went out and investigated many of these cases as a skeptic. At first, didn't put any stock into UFOs at all, but all the evidence changed his mind. But the main thing about the Zamora case was something definitely landed there. Blue Book says, yes, something landed here. And in the reports from the government, it says, we need to find whatever project this was and make it public because this really happened. We can't cover this up and say this was a weather balloon, even though I think they tried to do that at some point, or some skeptics said it was a balloon. Mm-hmm. With the burned ground, no way anyone around that could hide and make this hoax. Even the guys from Project Blue Book who are supposed to tamp this thing down they're thinking it's something from White Sands or something like that. But once they got into it and made all the phone calls and there's records of all of that, they thought maybe somebody's practicing for the space program or something like that. But they never did find anything. They never did find any kind of explanation for that particular landing. And I think what the skeptics have come up with, the balloon, if you look at the weather patterns, and I know that's something you talked about on it, mm-hmm. but the wind direction was in the opposite direction.
Correct. The
burned ground, I mean, there's some skeptics that's come up with all these well, it's a hoax because they did all these things, but it just would have been too elaborate. Lonnie Zamora sees it. Another officer pulls up right after the incident. They would have seen people trying to run away. There was no tracks around it or anything.
They could have been ninjas. They could have been sand ninjas.
But that is one case that really, and it was early on in our podcast, that was one case I really enjoyed reading all the documentation, and it led me to believe that, something happened here.
I don't know why, but I don't like that case.
Yeah. Well, listeners, go back and listen to the Zamori UFO. That's episode 5. And also, we do Fire in the Sky on episode 6. I remember we did a really big follow-up on that lasted about a half an hour because Jimmy and I are still going back and forth with more evidence or more arguments, I should say.
Yeah, we had a listener who let us know that some of the information that we conveyed that we picked up from another source, I can't even remember now, but I do remember it was specifically dealing with the radiation impacts of tree growth around Chernobyl, and we got that wrong.
That was Fire in the Sky.
Yeah. There was a documentary with Travis on it and a couple of other people, and they made the claim that the tree growth as displayed by the tree rings of some of the cut trees was indicative of radiation impacts or something like that, if I remember correctly. Something like that. I can't remember the details, but they utilized Chernobyl incident as the basis for their claim, and the Chernobyl papers actually stated the exact opposite.
Yeah, we had watched the documentary, and this guy says, "Hey, man, this is the same thing that happened at Chernobyl. We saw this explosive growth because these trees were exposed to radiation." And then, a listener either left a comment on YouTube maybe or
That's right.
sent us an email. I don't remember, but anyway, they were like, "Man, you're way off." And sure enough, we did the real research and we found out, And I think I would be safe to say that's when we learned not to listen to UFO documentaries.
Well, it's almost like you should know that before you go into it, but...
Well, we know now.
That's
one thing we learned. So it's if you hear an outrageous claim or even what sounds like a reasonable claim on a UFO show, I would just say maybe don't take it at face value. Maybe do a little bit of research on the internet yourself and find out the validity of that, especially when it's a claim like that. On the following episode, I think we did the Roosevelt after that, episode 7, mm-hmm. and that's when we put a little correction out on that. So, and I remember, speaking of making a mistake, I think it was when we were doing the history of UFOs, you made some comment about radar, and I had mentioned flight JAL 1628 because I was doing it from memory, no research on it yet, but I had remembered the case, and I thought it happened in the 70s. Of course, we do that case later in episode 9. a helpful listener emailed the show and said, "No, this could," I mean, in fact, really was very elaborate about all this stuff about radar and all these kind of things, that everything was upgraded in the 1980s. And of course, that is when JAL, Japanese Airlines Flight 1628, did occur. That case did occur in the mid-80s. I didn't put a correction out on that. I probably should have, but who knows how many people listen to that episode and they're just turned off immediately when they're like, that didn't happen in the 70s. That was in the 80s.
Yeah, I don't know. You know what my favorite UFO episode was? Probably Westall. Yeah.
Yep.
I really like that episode, and we got some good feedback from the person who was the narrator in the documentary.
Right.
He gave us a thumbs up.
We talk about the documentary Westall 66, which Jimmy and I both watched and, of course, did some more research. Now, this story is about a flying saucer that was sighted by a bunch of school children, and at least one teacher admits that he saw the UFO. This was outside of a middle school or an elementary school in Australia. And it's a big case in Australia. We didn't hear about it in the United States a lot until years later.
Yeah, it was actually Rosie Jones was the director and editor of that film. It was the narrator for the documentary was Sean Miller, I think.
Yeah, that's right, Sean Miller. Well, that's who actually reached out to us. It was really cool. We had a lot of nice stuff to say about it. And I noticed after that, our numbers in Australia started popping up. I guess he spread the word after that. So anyway, Sean, if you're listening, appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks indeed. As far as UFOs go, where do you sit? I mean, if I were to give a percentage of what I believe, let me phrase it this way. I'm going to split it even, 50-50, 50% chance that these UFOs are extraterrestrial based and 50% they're not. Or 50% that they are something outside of normal reality of what we're used to. Like it could be extraterrestrial, could be interdimensional, could be any other wacky stuff. I'll leave it all on the table.
Quite frankly, I'm a little 50-50 too. And I think digging into a lot of these cases, once we've gotten into them, there does seem to quite often be mundane explanations. And sometimes the skeptics come up with some very good counter arguments. Mm-hmm. But quite often, the skeptics, especially back in the old days, guys like Philip Klass, I'm trying to think of his predecessor. We talk about him on the History of UFOs, the astronomer from Harvard. Mm-hmm. They would come up with some of the most outrageous claims to say, I bet this is what it was. And they never interviewed any of the witnesses to any of these events. But they would interview like their coworkers, or they'd interview, trying to run down the reputation of the person that saw it, and then publish their findings and say, well, this is all just a promotional hoax, and this is how they did it. And they, sometimes, and a good example is Father Gill. So Father Gill was in New Zealand,
Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea, that's right. Father Gill, this is back in the 50s, and they had this UFO that showed up a couple of nights at least in a row, and it was a saucer-shaped object that had people on top, or beings, let's say, that was just floating around up there and like shooting a light up into the sky. They would wave to it, and the aliens waved back, or whatever they were. And at one point he said, wouldn't it be wonderful if they came down upon the playing field? I think he...
You love that.
But then the explanation is from that astronomer, I wish I could think of his name. Well, I bet he's myopic, and he has to wear glasses, and he was squinting because he wasn't wearing his glasses, and what he saw was Venus, and his eyelashes is what was causing what looked like little people on top of the light. That was his explanation. That was his skeptical analysis of this situation. Without even asking him, did you have your glasses? Where are you myopic? Do you wear glasses? I mean, just...
Clearly what he saw was a black cat duct taped to a kite smoking a cigarette.
Right. That annoys me. So on one hand, I like taking a skeptical look at each one of these. If the facts don't add up, just like the Roswell case, I mean, it's obvious that was not a flying saucer. When you put it all together and look at the original interviews and everything, and then, look at the other evidence of what it is, and then they all describe the same debris. It's just some people see alien hieroglyphics whenever it's tape from a novelty company. It's perceptions. It just wasn't what they think it is or claim it is now.
Right.
But I don't like to just flat out skeptics that come up with just really harebrained ideas. Or if they can't really think of anything, they just say it's a hoax and then they just leave it at that. They don't even have the benefit of the doubt. So I like to go into it kind of wide-eyed. And I do think there's some strange things. So I don't know. I don't know how to really answer that. And I've come around to thinking that maybe UFOs are something that's always been here, have always been with us. You know, when you start looking at ancient aliens and looking at things from the past and history, cave paintings and things like that, it's like has the existence of what we're experiencing or some people experience today. Is that something that's always been around? And it's just only a few people can perceive it. Like the case you talked about with the brains, where they analyzed the brains of the CIA, did the MRIs. Who was it? The guy from Stanford.
I want to say his name was Gary Nolan.
Gary Nolan.
Yeah, out of
Stanford.
Talking
about.
Yeah. So Gary Nolan out of Stanford was tasked with looking at some MRIs of patients for the CIA, some subset of that had seen UAPs and other anomalous things in the sky. And the MRIs were distinct amongst this subgroup who had seen UAPs in that and I forget what part of the brain it was that was different, but it was also the same part of the brain that you would see would be different in people who had schizophrenia. So, it's possible that they were releasing DMT in their brain because the brain produces that and having these hallucinations. That's entirely possible as one of the things that could be happening out there for some subset of humanity that see these things. However, I do want to say that the Nimitz is the gold standard for me because, assuming we've been told everything accurately by those people in charge of the program at the time, the evidence, it consists of not just human observations, but also the observations of electrical systems. So we have radar not just from one source, but from several sources. And we have eyewitness testimony from several sources. And we have events where they eliminated the possibility of software failures, and they were still getting hits on these devices that were being seen by people on the deck of the ship and in jets that were doing training exercises at the time. So they have a wealth of data from that one. And that's probably the most compelling one. That's probably the gold standard, short of actually capturing a craft.
Well, I'm going to ask you one question. This ties into a lot of our past two episodes.
Yep.
I know we did Roswell. I think we both are on the same page that Roswell was Project Mogul, most likely. But do you think that there's other crash saucers or there's other stories or events that have happened and that some people are now in possession of crashed flying saucer debris?
I've not seen anything to convince me that we've collected any material from extraterrestrial craft. I do know of the case with Gary Nolan where he's a material scientist at Stanford, where he has examined some material that brought up some interesting questions for him that led him to believe that it may be manufactured in a way that we're not yet able to do. We're not far from being able to do, and the material came from the 1950s, I believe. That might have some promising results that might lead me closer to believing that there's something out there, but I haven't seen anything as of yet. And it's entirely possible there's some cases out there I'm not aware of that we haven't covered, which would bring me even closer to believing we have something. But as it stands right now, I haven't seen anything that indicates we have extraterrestrial craft anywhere.
You know, there was a couple of things I forgot, and I know I talked a lot during the Roswell episodes, but there were two things I forgot to mention. The one thing that stuck out to me, and I totally forgot to mention, but I could tell you were wanting me to wrap it up last week. And the last thing that makes me feel like the Air Force never recovered a flying saucer, at least prior to 1948, was the Twining Memo. Do you remember that from the history of UFOs?
Goodness, yes. I mean, that's probably one of the seminal moments in early UFO history.
The Twining Memo, or this document, that was published in September of 1947. Now, that document is declassified. It was classified at the time, but it goes to show you how the Air Force, early on in the flying saucer phenomenon, was very concerned about it, what was going on, what was in our skies, what was in the United States airspace, what was everyone seeing. in it, he talks about the way they move and that it's a real phenomenon. These are real objects, but nowhere in there does it describe a crashed flying saucer or aliens. In fact, it doesn't talk about aliens at all. It just talks about the objects. And I think that's another telling piece. Whenever Roswell was supposed to happen in July 1947, why doesn't information about the crashed flying saucer show up in this top secret memo that was going to the Pentagon? That's because it didn't happen. But the Air Force was very concerned. And in fact, Twining had recommended putting together a special team to investigate UFOs. And that's when we got Project Sign, which was the grandfather of Project Blue Book. And, you know, I wanted to mention one last thing. I talk about the Roswell Incident book a lot in the past 2 episodes. William L. Moore was one of the authors, along with Charles Bartlett. William L. Moore later recanted that he believed Roswell was a crashed flying saucer, that very author. And if I can find it, I have seen on YouTube or somewhere a video where he's talking about that in a UFO conference. It's sometime in the mid-'80s, probably 6 or 7 years after he published this book. And once he saw there was all this other evidence, he decided, you know what? I think I was wrong. I don't think it was a crashed flying saucer.
That's probably because they got to him, Steve. They got to him.
They got to That's what they want you to think. But anyway, he's getting booed off the stage. I mean, it's like getting really rowdy because so many people are believers in this stuff. I mean, they were just like giving him a really hard time. I mean, I think the presenter or whatever, the MC or whatever, had to come up on stage and say, you people need to settle down. We all need to share ideas here and stuff, you know, and man, it's...
Put your tinfoil hats back on.
Yeah,
settle
if I can
down.
find that, I'm going to put that on Facebook because I think that also is pretty telling.
There's some free box wine in the back.
But I think that it's possible that Jacques Vallée claims to have had some of this material. It was examined by Gary Nolan. There were some very strange isotopic results from some of that material. That's interesting. Some of the material was supposedly expelled from like molten material expelled from a flying saucer in Illinois in the 1970s. They examined that. That also showed some strange properties. And also Jacques Vallée claims that the incident in Washington, D.C. in 1952, when some Air Force jets were scrambled for all these flying saucers around the Capitol, that they actually shot at one and shot a piece of material off of one of these craft.
Wait a minute. This made me think of multiple witnesses that saw a UFO sighting in 1953, and it was the famous aeronautical engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson. Johnson was the first team leader of Lockheed Skunk Works, and he saw it on the ground. And in fact, at the same time that he saw it from the ground, this craft that was beyond anything we were capable of making at the time, because he was in the know. He was making the most advanced aircraft at the time. A group of test pilots were flying a new craft along the coast not far from him and observed it from a different point in the sky. So two different, very talented individuals, their whole careers and lives were focused on aeronautics, witnessed this craft. So, I mean, it's things like that that make me go, yeah, there's probably something more to it, but what, I don't know.
And remember the case from Fort
Monmouth. It's like a New Jersey, Monmouth, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that was a good one.
Yes.
That's a good
you
one
have
as well.
radar data, and then you have separate eyewitnesses in a training plane.
And you had eyewitnesses on the ground.
So, I mean, something is going on in our skies, but what? Who knows?
Right. Well, let's switch gears here a second. And we haven't talked about this a whole lot, but what about abductions?
Yeah, I just don't believe abductions, but we cover two cases that made me go, well, maybe there's something to it. And that would be the Travis Walton case and the case out of Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Right.
So those two cases which we covered, I don't remember the episodes. You can look those up.
Episode 6 is called Fire in the Sky, which, of course, we named it after the Hollywood movie about the same incident. That's the Travis Walton one. And then we did the Pascagoula incident on episode We call it Mississippi churning, and that's episode number 36. If listeners would like to go back and check it out.
That was a good one.
Those are very convincing ones, I agree.
Yeah, so I think for the most part, if we're going to talk about abductions, I'm inclined to believe that nearly all of the abduction cases, at least this is my feeling right now, and it could change. Nearly all, if not all of the abduction cases are probably products of hallucinations, imagination, something like that. And I know we talked a little bit about cases where you would have sleep paralysis, and that would play into whether or not a person was able to move and hallucinating and hearing odd sounds, and that may be part of what's going on here. I'd read something here recently, a paper recently, that talked about the brain's ability to produce things like DMT and other psychedelics, that in some people it might spike to levels to where they're seeing hallucinations or other things like that. So for me, when we're talking about abductions, I'd say close to 100% of them, I think, are probably prosaic answers. But those cases like Travis Walton and Pascagoula leave the door open for me.
I think for myself, and I've done a little bit of research on this, even though we haven't done an episode yet, the modern abduction, the way we understand it, being taken aboard a ship against your will, really started with Betty and Barney Hill. I mean, there may be some other cases over there we haven't heard about, and there's weird stories all the time. I mean, if you really start looking into it, you can find all kinds of strange stories of spaceships landing and people going on board and
going to other planets, with their MG and having sexual encounters, raising kids on other planets. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stories like that. But I'm very suspicious of hypnosis. But I'm with you. I think something really happened with Travis Walton. I mean, if that's a hoax, man, I mean, it's just very elaborate. And the way they were able to all pass the lie detector tests, and Travis was missing for like 5 days or whatever it was. And then he shows up. Yeah, it's just a very, very unusual case. And you had so many witnesses. Usually these abductions have no witnesses other than the abductee or the experiencer, as they like to call it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still a little out there, but Pascagoula is pretty convincing, and it was 2 of them. Their reaction afterwards, I think, seemed genuine to me.
And in subsequent years. So you want to move on to cryptids? I'm anxious to get to the cryptids because I was thinking about it. In a steel cage match, who would win, Bigfoot or the Chupacabra?
Well, the Chupacabra has speed, I think, over Sasquatch.
Right.
I mean, yeah, he or she, not sure what it is. I mean, it depends on which description of Chupacabra we have. I mean, claws and all that.
Yeah, spikes on its back.
Right. But, Sasquatch does have the strength.
It's got the size
and
advantage.
The size advantage. Yeah. And the reach. All that fur, probably pretty hefty. Might be tough for the Chupacabra, to actually bite through it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I'm going for the Squatch.
I think I'm right there with you. I think he'd just pick up, twist its neck off, and use it as his Pez dispenser.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, that Sasquatch we saw crossing the river, maybe he was carrying a Chupacabra.
Yeah, maybe they're friends. Maybe like Chupacabras are pets of Sasquatch.
They may be buddies.
They might be pals.
Hey, I heard about you. You mean you're real?
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Groovy. So do you believe in Bigfoot? I mean, has your opinion on Bigfoot moved any? And before you answer that, take us back to the first episode and let us know where you stood at the first episode, and then if it's changed and how.
As best I could recall, I think I left it pretty open for Bigfoot, and I still do. I have some skeptical concerns when it comes to a North American ape species unknown. I think I'd mentioned this before. You'd have to have quite a few animals to have a healthy breeding population. I think they would be cited even more than they are now, and there would be more evidence. But on the other hand, there's so much evidence with the footprints. And I know skeptics are always going to say it's hoaxes. And they're, here's that guy in the 1950s that built the wooden ones and he hoaxed everybody. And that's true. That's true. But I think anyone will tell you that it would be impossible of the footprints found everywhere in the country and around the world to be attributed to hoaxes, considering how remote some of them are. Some people have seen these things miles off the beaten path. And I realize the footprints are really our only real evidence. The one is the dermal ridges. I don't think a hoaxer, anyone would take the trouble to do the dermal ridges, or that would ever even occur to someone to do that. And they occur quite often. Now they might, now that it's out there in the literature and in the world, that knowledge about dermal ridges. And then also back in the 70s, there was a set of footprints where one of the feet were crippled. It's sort of like, who would think to do that? And even looking back at the Patterson film, we looked at that extensively. And all I can say is if it's a hoax, and it could very well be, I'm going to say I'm 50-50 on whether that's real or not, but it would be a very good hoax, a very good hoax. I think it would be difficult to duplicate that. And in the 1960s, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but when you look at your average monster movie from that era, they didn't seem to have that good of special effects. That suit looks pretty good to me. Now I realize it's grainy and 16 millimeter film. It's shot at a distance and a lot of factors, but I still think that film looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm open to Bigfoot. I think it's quite possible, actually. In fact, I may have even after like having less on the show and looking into it more, I think I maybe even moved a little more into the positive camp than I was when we started the show.
Yeah, I was pretty much against Bigfoot, but I think I might have moved 1 percentage point into the Bigfoot camp just based on my visit out west to the Pacific Northwest. The woods out there are just different. They're denser, they're darker, they're deeper, they're more rustic than what we have on the East Coast. More primal. That's a better word. They're more primal.
But we don't have any virgin wood that I'm aware of, unless there's some protected crop of wood somewhere that's never been touched. But there's no virgin wood that I'm aware of on the East Coast at all.
Yeah.
It's all been timbered at one point.
Right.
I mean, most of the trees aren't that old.
So, I mean, given that, I mean, there's maybe a 1 percentage point in the camp, but I would think that there would be something other than just footprints. And we have nothing else. We have no hair, we have no DNA flakes, we have no bones, we have no fur, we have nothing. I mean, nothing.
All right. No fossil record.
Yeah,
I get it. And I get it. And all those things that you're talking about is what kind of keeps my skeptical side on the skeptical side, because I guess I would say that if someone did find a carcass or some bones or whatever, or skull of Bigfoot, I don't know. I guess I would be kind of surprised because it's been so long since the legend of Bigfoot's been around, but we really have nothing more than footprints.
Yeah, and every time they get close to a Bigfoot or a Yeti or a Yowie or something like that, they come up with evidence that really points to other species out there. Rare species, nonetheless, but species nonetheless.
I think the Yeti
is a bear.
Yeah, I think the Himalayan bear is a very good prospect for the Yeti.
Sure.
All the DNA samples they've taken from any of the Tibetan villages, that every one except one turned out to be a Himalayan bear, and the other one was a Himalayan wolf. And Tibetan people, because that's a rare animal, right? Mm-hmm. The Himalayan bear is very rare anyway. That may be the Yeti to them. See, right. I told you I had a Yeti scalp. You know? There may be no difference there. Any other cryptids?
Well, I mean, the Tasmanian tiger we went over quite a bit, and I think that might...
Well, that was a real animal that we know existed.
Right. But we're talking cryptids, and that falls under the cryptid category, and I would say that there's a chance that there's still some Tasmanian tigers in the wild. A slim chance, but a chance nonetheless, because there have been several that they thought were pretty much extinct that they've discovered in recent years. Other species, and some of them fairly large. I mean, that vampire deer is the one that freaked me out. You get the big old fangs coming out of it.
No kidding. Yeah. I mean, it's possible. I know there's probably been an awful lot of people looking for that animal, though.
Oh, definitely. And that they haven't found it really points to the
any trace of it.
Yeah. So, Steve, what do you think about the Loch Ness Monster? We covered that in an episode, and other lake monsters as well, but specifically Nessie, because Nessie's the most famous one. Right?
I'm sorry. I don't think there's any evidence for it, especially when people try to compare it to a plesiosaur.
Yeah.
An animal that was an air-breathing dinosaur, really a reptile, not even a dinosaur. If it was some kind of derivative of that animal, you would see it more often because it breathes air. It would have to come to the surface more often than And I'm in these really populated lakes, and then you hear these stories of sea serpents or lake monsters. Yeah, I don't know. I have a really hard time with it. I mean, it's cool legends, and I enjoy them. And then, of course, you have perfectly rational people that not only at Loch Ness, but other lakes like Lake Champlain, Champy, that claim, hey, I was out in my boat, and this thing raised its head and looked right at us and then sunk back below the wave. So, I don't know. I find that one really hard. I don't know. Lake monsters, I have a hard time with.
Yeah, I'm with you too.
I'll leave it open. Who knows?
Well, given the temperature of Loch Ness, and it was created, 150,000 years ago, whatever it was, it's a fairly recent geographical feature.
Yeah, maybe less than that. Yeah, like from the last ice age around 10 or 12,000 years ago, probably.
And it's so cold, and there's no evidence within the water itself. They've sonared that thing to death, and there's just nothing down there. Yeah, I don't believe
I agree with you.
Yeah.
What about Mothman and other winged humanoids? We did a big episode on that.
Oh, yeah, Mothman's real. Mothman's definitely real. He's in my bathroom. Every time I go in my bathroom, I see Mothman.
That Mothman wallpaper you talk about
that's right.
all the time.
That's right. You got to make the bathroom pleasing to the eye.
Oh, yeah. I don't know, man. Mothman, something happened. I'll say that.
I think it's people's imaginations went a little wild, and they were just seeing a large bird. That's really what I think happened. But, as a West Virginian, Mothman's real. You all should come and visit. We need the tourism dollars, folks. Yeah,
it's either an owl or a sandhill crane.
Yep.
A lot of people's talked about both of those, so it's possible. And it's one of those things where everyone's talking about it. It's in the news. It's in the newspaper. Then you see it, right? You see that animal that's causing the stir anyway. I mean, your mind may play tricks on you. I mean, all these sightings were during night mostly.
Yeah. And then they're having those sightings up in Chicago, right? Those jackasses are trying to take our Mothman.
Yeah, what's up with them, man?
Jerks.
Yeah, that's true. There are some winged humanoid sightings in Chicago. There have been for the past few years, so who knows?
They just wanted to see the Windy City. They're tourists. Really. They're coming right back to West Virginia, Pleasantsville.
Yeah. So let's touch on this one, the paranormal. We haven't done a whole lot with that, like ghosts and spirits and that kind of stuff. What has your opinion varied? I mean, we've done very little other than we've told a few ghost stories around Halloween. We had Heather Moser on about the Bell Witch and the haunted cave, the cursed cave. Remember that?
Yeah, so
she was our guest on episode 22, the Bell Witch.
Yeah, I remember I told her that I would get a wheelbarrow and start taking rocks out of the cave.
Right.
I think my paranormal could be summed up by my visit to the insane asylum down in Weston, West Virginia here recently. It's a pretty popular tourist site, and they've done several of the ghost shows down there and everything. As we were going through the tour, me and the kids, the tour guide was telling us that there's this particular chair in one of the rooms that one of the pretty active spirits does not like you messing with it. So don't touch it, don't do anything. As soon as she says you can go and explore on your own, this level on your own, me and my daughter went straight beeline to that room, and I went in there and I was putting my hands all over it. I was sitting in it. I was going, come get me. Come get me, buddy. Because I just don't believe in it. So I'm a very bad person when it comes to that stuff. I would be the first one to get killed in a scare flick, because it'd be like, there's a monster in there. There's a ghost in there. And I'd be like, no, there isn't. I go open the door and look, no ghost.
I'll tell you what, man, for my part, I'm really skeptical of paranormal ghosts and stuff, but I don't tempt fate, man. There's no way I would do that.
Yeah.
No way.
Doesn't bother me at all.
Well, okay. Although, I will admit, when we had Wendy on the show and she talked a little bit about spirit mediums, I mean, I know our very first episode, I was super negative on psychics and stuff, and I still pretty much am, and still think most of them, like Sylvia Brown and stuff, are just, charlatans and frauds, but take advantage of people and take their money because they want to believe and they just take advantage of it. But a lot of people do that, right? And other things. But, it made me think more about it. In fact, I have been playing. I've kind of played around with the idea of just trying it, just to see what they would say.
Trying what? Oh, trying to go see a psychic?
Yeah, trying to palm reader, psychic. I don't know.
Yeah.
If you don't believe in it, what's the harm? But then on the other hand, if I went into it being completely skeptical and she could tell me all these details about things that only I could know, I don't know. I just think it would be an interesting experiment. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I just don't want to give him any money.
I'm not going to say I want to do it because, again, I don't like tempting fate and opening doors. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be that way, and I consider myself very logical and everything, but at the same time, I think it's being married to my...
You're Italian.
My wife with a lot of Italian heritage.
She's probably the only thing that saved you from certain death. I think for my part, I just think if there is something on the other side, they're all just looking at me and going, yeah, not worth my time. I ain't gonna bother.
Too hard to convince that guy.
Yeah, I guess a loser. I don't bother with him. No, I don't like psychics, and I don't like the paranormal because it just does nothing for me. I'm willing to listen to folks and have them come on and share their experiences with me for sure. But
well, believe it or not, earlier today I was on Amazon checking out spirit boxes. You know, the spirit box thing that Les was telling us, Les Odell.
You put the little eyes on. We should do that. We should do an episode where we're doing the spirit
I thought
box.
about just trying. Well, the truth is, I ran into an old friend of mine who made an appearance on the Dead Files here locally, and I totally forgot about this. You forget about things in your backyard, but we have this haunted amusement park right here in the county called Shawnee Lake, and there's been more than one ghost file documentary made about it. Well, anyway, my friend was on the Dead Files. He's somewhat of a local historian. In fact, talked to him about coming on the show. So we'll probably have an episode about that. But I actually thought, because we watched that Hellier show. We did the Hellier episode with Jason Ruhl.
Oh, yeah.
Talked about that movie or that series. That guy's on the porch just hollering words out and stuff while people are asking him questions. And he, not supposed to be able to see or hear what's going on around him. He just yells out these words, right? Yeah, and I thought, well, man, why not try it out?
Yeah, put those little...
what could it hurt?
Yeah, put the blindfold on, sit there and say...
Put the blindfold on, you put the headphones on, that all you can really hear static, and then apparently it's zipping through all bands of this radio, so it's going to pick up little words and stuff from different stations.
Pork rinds.
Or whatever.
Peanut butter.
And
Elevated fart.
And it's it's supposed to be, the spirit, some way that the spirit's...
Route 77. Touchdown!
And then of course everyone has to try and interpret what you're hearing. I don't know. What made me think about it was I was trying to find that episode of Dead Files to see my friend Danny on it.
Right.
And then they were walking around blindfolded, on Lake Shawnee. So I thought, hey, maybe we could duplicate that experiment sometime. Do the whole thing.
Hey, I'm game. I'll do it.
Yeah.
I'll put the little blindfold on. Get the spirit box out.
Well, anyway, listeners, just stay tuned for that. We'll follow up on that another time. Let me ask you a quick question. We always do at least 2 news stories, sometimes more. What was your favorite news story in the past year?
This one's easy for me. It's the one with the alien croissant.
Oh, you know what?
Tree.
I was going to say, and I wasn't even on
you
that
weren't
show.
on that episode. I wish you could have been. But
the alien pastry in the tree was a good one. I agree with you on that.
They dispatched EMS and other people to come get.
I remember when you did that story. You couldn't even get all the way through it without laughing.
It was a croissant tree.
Somebody had thrown a croissant up in a tree. What was it? People thought it was an alien?
Yeah, they misidentified it as some kind of alien creature.
Yeah, they called the authorities and they showed up, and it was a croissant stuck in the branches of a tree.
Well, they got it and saved everybody, so it had a happy ending.
I have to admit, that's probably my favorite news story too. We've had some funny ones.
Yeah,
though.
my other one was the one out of Russia. You remember the one that you brought to the table about the little-headed Russian
the flying
aliens?
saucer.
Yeah, the tiny-headed Russian aliens that did the promenade around this town.
Oh, that was a good one.
That was a really
forgot about
good
that
one. They had to bring in
there
the
were
fire
giants with little tiny heads.
Right,
And they paraded around the park and then got back in their ship and left. Yeah. They had a robot or something with them.
Yeah.
I forgot about that one. It was pretty good.
There's some good ones there.
Is there a favorite episode that we've done? Is there an episode that we stand out you feel like, you learned something or you particularly enjoyed doing?
I learned something from all of these, really. But let me look through the list here, and I'll go through them pretty quickly and see if there's any one that really stands out that was really fun to do. You know what? I really enjoyed the Bell Witch with Heather.
Yeah.
She was a lot of fun.
Tell you the truth, I've enjoyed all of our guests that we've had. We've had Jason on a couple of times, and I'd like to have him back on the show.
I love having Jason on, man. Definitely.
Yeah, it's nice having another perspective, just instead of just our two voices sometimes. And, Jason's had some unusual experiences in his own life. It's fun having him on the show. And he has his own podcast called the Esoteric Book Club, which is a really fun podcast I listen to every week. But anyway, yeah, we'll have him on again.
Yeah,
I've really enjoyed all of our guests. I liked having Les. He was our very first guest.
Les is awesome.
Talked about Bigfoot here in West Virginia. Heather was really good. I liked having Wendy on here, too. Of course, we know Wendy real well.
Yeah. And Wendy started her own podcast. I haven't checked it out yet.
Did she really?
Yeah, we'll plug it here once she gets up and running.
Know?
I don't, but I think it's probably going to have something to do with artists, if I had to suspect.
Okay, yeah, she is a professional artist.
Right. Yeah, so I suspect it's probably going to be something in that vein. But once we know more and she gets her first several episodes out, we'll touch base with her and let you guys know. Jason, on a side point, so one of my friends listens to the episodes, George, and we've mentioned him a couple times before. He was talking today, and he's like, yeah, that Jason guy, I really like him. He's really good on the show. Steve. Hey, Steve. What's your favorite episode, man?
It's hard to pick just one, but I really enjoyed doing the ones in which I get to go back and look at the old government papers that have been declassified, or really can find some serious research that are not just from UFO investigators. Like the history of UFO part 1 and 2. I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the Zamora. And in fact, I really enjoyed doing Roswell, because I've known since episode 1 that we would have to talk about the Roswell incident, and I've been kind of putting it off. It's been on the schedule since day 1, and I kept pushing it out because I wanted to make sure we covered it all, and I've done research on it since we started this podcast. Finally got it out there, and I really, really like doing that. I'd like to find some more subjects we could really sink our teeth into like that. And I like some of the stuff we've looked up in the ancient civilizations. That was a cool one. Mm-hmm. I guess the ones where I can really find some stuff to research and read about are the ones I like the most.
Yeah, the ancient civilization thing is pretty incredible. Some recent news came out. I think I want to say I saw it last week, where they uncovered footprints in the prints of giant sloths in New Mexico, which now dates mankind in North America far earlier than any of the current anthropologists had suspected.
Moving forward into the new year, into the next 50 episodes, what are some things you want to look into? What are some goals you might have for the show?
I would like to keep growing. Obviously, we're going to do some more contests because that seems to be pretty popular. Do some more content. I got a whole bunch of stuff that we have collected. Lots of fun paraphernalia around cryptids and UFOs.
Parajunk.
Books. Junk. Well, I mean, you got guns. Little Nerf guns. That's pretty cool. Bigfoot themed.
That's cool.
And, we got some can openers that are Bigfoot themed and some UFO stuff, book, other things of that ilk, and some ornaments that we still have some ornaments left over that Wendy had supplied to us that for giveaway.
That's right.
So that's something I'd like for us to do a little bit more of. Maybe get some big names in the UFO community on here. I would really like to talk with Christopher Mellon. So maybe we'll see if we can track him down and get a few moments of his time. That would be
for sure.
That would be
I'd like to get Seth Breedlove and some of the documentary filmmakers like him on here and discuss their projects and things. I would like to have more guests too. It's not always easy to line up people to come on. I can say that I've really enjoyed the past year, just seeing our steady growth of new listeners. Not only do we see a lot of downloads for each episode every week, but we see a lot of downloads for our older episodes now, which is telling me maybe we're getting new listeners, new people coming across the show. So if you're kind of new, welcome to the show. Hope you've enjoyed what you've heard so far. And then I know we have some listeners that have been out there since, episode 1 practically. So thanks for being loyal and thanks for staying with the show. That's you guys are why we're doing this show, so that We can bring you the truth.
Or a version of it, at the very least.
And not take it too seriously.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're just a nice, fun diversion from all the seriousness in the world.
Yeah, it's always nice just to kick back and think about aliens exterminating the human race instead of having to deal with all the day-to-day.
Yeah.
And Bigfoot, a carnivorous Bigfoot, in the woods, waiting right outside your tent. So if you're listening to this in the woods, those shadows and crunching sounds outside, it's going to be fine. I'm sure you're going to be okay.
Yeah, well, it could be the chupacabra. If at first you think it's a coyote, but then you see spines on its back, it's a chupacabra.
Chupacabra.
We learned that.
What's that big old Mexican rat? That would be the chupacabra, sir.
Listeners, thank you so much for sticking with us for 50 episodes. We have loved every minute of it, and we plan to keep trucking on. Send us an email, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Let us know what you think about the show. Also, if you have a story to tell, share it with us. We'd love to share it with the rest of our listeners on the show. We can keep it completely anonymous if you like. Jimmy, anything else you want to add?
No, I think we pretty much exhausted this one.
All right. Well, with all that being said, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and I'll see you next week.
And Jimmy Coe, keep your eyes to the skies and your feet on the ground. We'll catch you next week.
Chupacabra.
Chupacabra.
All right. So, Bigfoot versus Mothman. Cage fight.
That's a good one, because are there any windows?
A cage fight? I don't know.
Cage fight. If there's no windows...
Let's assume there's no way to fly away.
There's no way to fly away, but if there's no windows, then Mothman is telepathic, and he can probably bring Bigfoot to his knees just with...
See, that's what I'm thinking. Mind control. I think we have reports of mind control.
I think Mothman wins that one.
But Bigfoot may be immune to mind control. We don't know. I think as long as you leave the window rolled up, you're okay.
Yeah. As long as Bigfoot is in like a 1975 Ford truck, and he's got the windows, he's hunkered down in there.
Yeah.
He can just run over the Mothman.
Psionic attacks or anything.
Yeah. I think, that's a good point. It depends.
I'm still going for that Sasquatch, man.
I'm going to go with Mothman just because he's my man.
Yeah, you're just being loyal.
Damn straight, man. Damn straight.
All right, man, let's get out of here.
Definitely. I need to sleep. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. If you'd like to support the show, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/cosmicsponge, where you get access to exclusive content, including our Weird Wonders, news, and stories released every week. To explore everything Cosmic Sponge has to offer, including other ways to support the show, head on over to our website at www.cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.